Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager at THECONNECTSHOW for a podcast show details. Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where we educate, enlighten, and entertain. Folks, you're going to want to listen to this podcast. I do have amazing guests on my show. If I had to toot my own horn, my guests are phenomenal. And I have a phenomenal guest with me today with a story that needs to be told about. We should never, ever forget about the Holocaust. And my guest today is Stella Hart, is an award-winning choral and instrumental composer, casual author, and educator. She lives in rural Ontario, Canada, with her husband, and they have an expansive heritage apple orchard. And she wrote the book, based on true stories, Discovering Twins, No Secret is Safe Forever. Stella Hart, welcome to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you so much, Betsy. What a great introduction. It's such an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. Stella, your book is so phenomenal. And I just want to tell the audience, that as growing up Jewish, I watched movies about the Holocaust that gave me nightmares for days. I was young. I was maybe 8 or 9. And to watch what I saw was horrifying. Your book, I think, should be in every grade school, middle school, high school history class, because your book personalizes it. And the pictures, it puts faces and names to people who died in the Holocaust because they were Jewish. And I want to thank you, first of all, for writing this book from the bottom of my heart. I really thank you for sharing your story. What inspired you to write your book?
It was a long journey, Betsy. It started when I was 18, and I first discovered that my mother in the Netherlands had a Jewish background, which she never disclosed to anyone. And then as my mother aged and as I matured, grew into and became a young mom, became older woman myself, my mother gradually eked out tiny bits of these secrets that she housed so deep within herself. She did not want anyone to know, and I was not allowed to tell anyone. When my mother became ill with Alzheimer's, these secrets that she was hiding started to come out. She couldn't help it. She had hysteria. She had hallucinations. Her hallucinations were of the Nazis coming to torture her, to get her secrets out of her. My mother's 86, 87 years old at this time. When my mother passed away, I began, mostly because my father came to live with us for a little while. My father is Dutch, has been Dutch for generations, has no Jewish background. And while my father, tried to entertain my 89-year-old dad, and we were looking up things from his past on the internet, and up popped his house in Amsterdam, and he was a sailor, and I Googled the names of big freighters that he had served on. And then just one day I asked him what happened to his grandparents. And he said, I had no idea. He said, when my father, who was 38 years old at the time, my grandfather, came home from being away at sea because he was also a sailor, both of his parents had died within 11 days of each other. And I go, you have no idea? He goes, I have no idea. And that started me looking. So I had no intention of digging into my mother's past, of trying to find family. I knew a little bit. I thought that what I knew was all there was. So it started by my looking for these great-grandparents of mine who died 11 days of each other in their early 60s. And that progressed to I found out what happened. I found all kinds of my father's family. My grandmother in Amsterdam, who was Jewish, my mother's mother, was married to an Italian. I found all the Italians. But then one day I tripped over some of these relatives that had been killed in the Holocaust that I knew nothing about. I knew a teeny bits about. And I just went deeper and deeper and deeper down this black hole and discovered hundreds, no, over 1,000 direct family members who had been killed in the Holocaust. And I started to write these things down. I thought, okay, well, I've discovered all this. I need to preserve this so that I can share it with, my children, my extended family. And then from there, it started turning into stories. I would imagine what life was like for these people, and I would do research into Europe at the time, the Netherlands at the time, before the war, way back before the war, even 100 years. How did we get there? And the people that I found, I turned them into real characters and wrote historical fiction stories about their lives, and I wove it with my own memories, the stories that I did know, until it turned into the book, Discovering Twins. The theme, Discovering Twins, was my mother once said to me, oh, well, there's lots of twins in the family. I had no idea, and she never mentioned it again. So I also found multiple sets of twins, and they're documented, and there's stories about them as well. The stories that are contained within the book are a combination of true stories as well as historical fiction about the people that, of course, I had no stories for. So I gave them stories. So that's a bit of a background right there for you, Betsy.
Oh, thank you. You brought out so many good nuggets, Stella. First of all, I have to say, because I run a support group for people who are caregivers, and I'm very much an Alzheimer's and advocate, that when people with Alzheimer's, when we think they're hallucinating, they may not be hallucinating. They might be reliving an event in their life that maybe we don't know about. Just like your mother was talking about, it was a real event in her life, but nobody would have known that if they didn't know your mom's history. And what a burden that your mother carried all her life, not being able to tell anyone the history, because she was still probably afraid that
she was
a
terrified,
Nazi would
Betsy.
get her. Yes.
Yeah, she was terrified.
I could see why.
Yeah, so I was born only 15 years after the end of the war. That's no time at all. Things would have been still so very raw for her. And here she was now in Canada. She left the Netherlands, married my dad. And she said, I'm not going to marry a sailor. So he quit his career as a sailor and immigrated to Canada. It's a real love story, married in Paris in a Christian Dior gown. Nice. When she was in tiny little Estevan, which is 9 miles north of the North Dakota border. North Dakota isn't exactly heavily populated either, so we would go across the border multiple times. We would go to Minot, where my mother would be like a child in a candy store with the Kmart flashing blue light specials. And then we would all come back to Estevan with our new clothes and our new shoes and our newfound stuff, because it's only 2 hours away. But But so here she was in the middle of nowhere, and in a town that was populated by immigrants from all over the world, and she did not want to disclose her background. And there was just no way any of us could say anything, but then I knew nothing as a child. I knew nothing until I went to Holland after I'd graduated from high school when I was 18 years old. And I just this, so my mom, we would visit all these relatives that I didn't even know existed, all on my dad's side. And then in the book, I talk about one day we go to visit these other relatives, and they are Uncle Jacob and Aunt Rebecca, and they were in their mid-60s. So 1978, here we have relatives in their mid-60s called Jacob and Rebecca. And I said to my mom on the way home, they're Jewish. She said, yes, they are. So that's sort of the first window into my mother's past that I had a glimpse into.
How did it make you feel, Stella, to go back to Holland with your mom when you're 18 and to see the area and then to find out that you are Jewish because it goes by the mother's side?
It goes by the mother's side. But so when I said that to my mother, I said, so if Jacob is your mother's brother, that means that your mother is also Jewish. And she jumped down my throat. No, she's not. She's not. She married an Italian. Okay. I don't argue. I'm not the argumentative type, so I didn't say
right.
So in my mother's mind, she was not Jewish. She was Italian. DNA notwithstanding, that's what she held on to. That was the tenet that she held on to.
That's interesting. I have done other interviews with people who have, written about the Holocaust, and it still amazes me, Stella, and you even bring this out in your book. This is what I got from your book. It didn't matter, if you were blended into society and the Jewish people assimilated and they intermarried, which was not real common at that time, but they did intermarry. But still, with intermarriage and being assimilated, they were not accepted in Europe at all. They were not accepted. They were not considered Polish or, Austrian. They were considered Jewish, which really boggles my mind. And so it must have been really fascinating for you to find out all this information.
Oh, it was phenomenal. And so, of course, you have all these questions, but none of the questions could be asked. So there were very few answers, which is why it was decades later, after my mother passed away, that I felt that the secret now belonged to me, that I had the right to discover all the things that she was trying to hide. And I've taken ownership of the secret now, and it's not so much a secret anymore. Interestingly enough, Betsy, that I gave my eldest brother a copy of the book, and he hasn't spoken to me since. This is a risk whenever you have something, this is a risk. This is not necessarily information that the rest of the family wants everybody else to know about. It's deeply personal. But on the other hand, as you mentioned when you gave the introduction, we have to tell these stories. We have to say what happened, because if we don't, we all know that it could very well happen again, or that people won't believe it ever happened. So at any risk, at any cost, those who have stories, if they are able to tell, I really believe that we have a world responsibility to tell.
Yes, definitely. I 100% agree, because the people from the Holocaust are elderly and they are dying, and there won't be anyone left to say this happened. The Shoah Foundation has a lot of videos on YouTube. People could go, and watch. But, You know what? You have a suggestion. You should contact them and tell them of your book and your story. They probably would want to talk to you. Just so that I'll give you another job. Another job for you to do. I just think that, you know, it's so important to know. And there are people who carry this deep secret that their family, they had Jewish family and they were killed in the Holocaust. I remember a couple, they were from Germany, from the Jewish Community Center in my town. They had numbers on them, and Stella, they looked old. They weren't old, but, you know, when you're 8 years old, you think anyone over 30 is old. They looked very old for their age. They died young, and so did their daughter. Their daughter died young, maybe from complications of what they went through in a concentration camp. Who knows? But this girl, Sonia, she had no family, no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. I mean, I can't even imagine that. And this is what people, you know, have to realize. And I like in your book that you contacted a cousin, and he was a twin, if memory serves me right.
No, he wasn't a twin. He was an only child.
Only child. Oh, okay.
First cousin. Yeah, he was an only child. So if you had a family with twins, or even not twins, but lots of children, and you have a chance to go into hiding, who do you pick? How do you do that? And in Samuel's case, he was an only child. So at the age of 4, his parents he was taken by the Dutch resistance, and he was hidden throughout the Netherlands and survived. And I tripped over him in my research and contacted him and found him. And as my book also has, there's a story about him and his experiences, and then he and I together.
Or did he had grandchildren that were twins?
Yeah.
Was twins in his family? That's maybe where I got confused. Sorry about that.
Are absolutely right. No problem. And what's remarkable is that, so getting back to the twins, I traced the ancestry of twins from way before the Second World War, 100 years before, because I could see in my genealogy every 1 or 2 years, here comes twins. There's a set of triplets, like without break until 1943. And then 1943, there's nothing until these new twins that arrived 78 years later. So they are like the victorious twins after the destruction of the entire family. 78 years later, you just can't put that gene down. Boom, there it is again, another set of twins.
That's incredible. I never heard of a family with so many twins in it. And, you know, just that's unusual. And in your book, because I was thinking when I was reading this, all these twins, and they're going to concentration camp, and I'm thinking, oh, Dr. Mengele loved to experiment on twins, that butcher. Of course, we can't curse on this, so I can't say what I really think of the person. But I read that they were gassed before Dr. Mengele, you know, could get a hold of them, and I think that's better off to be gassed than to be dissected while you're alive, and to be experimented on that this butcher mad person did to twins, because he was fascinated with twins. And your book just brings it home, but in such a personal way. And I have to tell the audience, my son Josh read this book, because my son Josh knows that he is Jewish by having a Jewish mom, and he has a cognitive disability, and he liked the pictures, and it made it more personal for him to see the pictures. And I just love the way you did this book. I really do. And don't mean to sound redundant, but when I'm excited about something, I'm passionate. I can't shut up about it. I just really think it's a fascinating book. What would you like the reader to take away, Stella, from reading your book?
Oh, so I'm glad you asked that, Betsy, because of course that's really important. Why should anyone, bother reading anything or listening to a piece of music or even looking at a piece of art? There has to be some kind of an emotional response, an emotional takeaway. So the book is funny, it's serious, it's horrific, it's relatable, and it's even endearing. So I want the reader to connect with the people in the book and then take that connection to our present-day world-day events. How does this relate to me in the year 2022, events that happened in 1940 to 1945? And there are so many parallels that we can still make in today's society: racism, anti-Semitism, inequality, subjugation of women. They're all there, packed into these stories. They're, I not bashed over your head in a statistical textbook way, but in a storytelling, embracing kind of a way. So I want the reader to just be in those times for the time that they're reading the book, but then reflect on it afterwards so that perhaps it makes them, I don't want this to sound kind of preachy, but more aware, more sympathetic, more empathetic for people not like them, for cultures not like them. If people aren't exposed, then there's no way that they can ever be self-aware and even make changes in their own thinking. So basically, take away from the book more awareness of what happened. I learned so much that I didn't even know. I had no idea. And then take that awareness and
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, and then, sure, and then just, wrap that awareness up with, now I know more that I didn't know before.
How did it make you feel, Stella, to find out that you had relatives, a lot of relatives, killed in the Holocaust? You didn't know you were Jewish, and then to find out your mom was Jewish, even though she doesn't want to admit it, and then to find out you had many, many relatives killed in the Holocaust. What was that like for you to find that out?
It was staggering. The very first people that I found, and you're just looking at your family tree, and you expect to see the normal stuff, and then all of a sudden you see the names of where they died, Auschwitz. The dates are all the same, September 30th, 1942, over and over and over again. In one family, a mother, father, 5 children, same day, same day. And you realize what that is. It's like I just cried and cried and cried. Because you know something, but knowing it on an esoteric level is different from knowing it on a visceral level. It's right there in front of your face.
Yes.
So then I felt...
Yes.
So then there's this obligation to carry on and find everybody. I sort of had this desperate urge. I'm going to find them all, And yesterday, Betsy, I was working on my family tree, and I found more. Every time I go and I research a family line, I find more. It just keeps going, even in the year 2022. So back to your question of how did that impact me? I mean, it's sobering, it's devastating, but it's also in a strange way empowering, because it's like finding this buried treasure and bringing it and owning the responsibility to bring it out to the light.
Yes, that is so true. I belong to a Jewish genealogy group on Facebook and have attended some of their seminars, and your story reminds me of this, that people were, children were sent away, they were raised maybe Catholic or different religion, so they didn't know they were Jewish until they had a DNA test. Some people don't want to, admit it because they're afraid. Some people were raised in different families, and then they find out, oh, I'm Jewish, or they were adopted. And it's just really interesting that more people are finding out through DNA that they are Jewish, and they didn't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the biggest thing about that is it's such an equalizer. If you go back far enough, we're all Jewish, aren't we?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, these DNA tests are incredible. Somebody could take a DNA test and they find out their they had Chinese in their background, or African in their background, Jewish in their background. And it just shows that we are all human beings. All of this stuff that we have contrived to put people into baskets and boxes is just so irrelevant. We are who we are, where we are. We are a combination of where we have come from, so the more we know about that, then the better people we can be today.
That's right. And I always say, you put children in the sandbox, they don't care who they're playing with. They really don't care. Right. When do they start to care? When the adults open up their big mouths and start poisoning them in their mind. That's when they start noticing. Because
Sadly,
I worked in a preschool. Yes. Yes. And I can't thank you enough, Stella, for coming on today, for writing your book, and coming on and sharing your story, which is, I have to tell people, it is a quick reading, powerful, emotional story that will impact you. You will not be the same after you read the story, and I mean that in a good way. It will open your eyes to the history of that time. And I just think of your mom and the burden that she had to carry, and she saw things, right? People went to your grandfather for them to save things, and the things that your mom saw. Of course, she was frightened. And
and she was only a teenager, Betsy. She was 12 years old when the war started, and imagine the emotional, psychological trauma of that entire generation who lost their teenage years to those events. Jewish or not even Jewish. I mean, people starved in the Second World War. People were traumatized and brutalized beyond the Jewish population that was taken away. So it's the psychological and the mental impact of that. Look at it; it's still affecting us today. Because here I am, the daughter of my mother, and here I'm carrying these things. They impact me differently, but it goes through generations.
Absolutely, and I watched videos, and children of Holocaust survivors say that, how their parents were, that it affects them and even their grandchildren. Is that to know that their grandparents, aunts or uncles or whoever it was, suffered at the hands of the Nazis. And there still is anti-Semitism today. I grew up with it. I'm 64 years old, and I grew up with anti-Semitism. And being, a racist to other people, folks, is not pleasant. It's not pleasant to be called names because of your ethnic background. I know that firsthand. My parents' house was graffitied. It's just the neighborhood we lived in. And graffiti by neighbors. Why? I always say, Stella, that my platform, my show is my bullhorn, because I think, I wish I had a bullhorn to tell the world. Well, I do. We have to stop the hate, people. We really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all the same.
The question is why? Yeah.
Why? Yes.
Why? If someone is being openly racist, anti-Semitic, hate, whatever, why? answer me in one sentence why. There is no answer. The answer is because they want to. No other reason. So that's what has to be stopped.
Yes, and I have to say this, Stella, to her. My husband would have loved your book because he loved history. He loved history. He loved watching about World War II. And this is kind of funny, but when my husband Matt would watch World War II and Hitler came on, I would have to tell him, flip it. I can't stand to hear that man's voice. I'll have nightmares. That's just the Jew in me. I can't help it. I cannot hear his voice. I can't look at him on TV. I will get nightmares because it was ingrained in me that, the evil. And I saw it in the movies that were shown to me, and it's horrible what happened. And it did happen, and people will say it didn't, but it did. And we should not forget because it can happen again. People in power can stir up anger and hatred for another race, ethnic background. And so easily, very easily, especially in today's environment. And we can't let that happen. As human beings, can't let that happen. I always say this, cut us open and we all bleed the same blood. And we're more alike than we are different. Yes, we have differences, but we can learn to live with each other. You don't have to like someone, regardless of who they are. Not everyone likes everybody. That's fine. But you don't have to bully and kill and be mean to people. It's not acceptable.
No, it's not. One of my uncles who survived, whose name was Louis, he was the brother of Jacob, who's talked about in the book. He said once that particularly the Dutch people, when they arrived on the trains, there were doctors and lawyers and flour sellers, bakers, butchers, peddlers. And you could tell by their clothes who had money and who had not. But a half an hour later, when everyone was stripped naked and walked down the gravel path, they were all the same. You could not tell who was who and who had what because everyone was leveled to the bottom. So these things that we put on ourselves that we believe make us better are just exterior. On the inside, as you say, we are all the same.
Yes. Very interesting that you mentioned about the Dutch people, Stella, because I just watched one of the YouTubes about the Holocaust, and the person said that the Dutch people who were doctors, the people who were doctors that were educated, were not, they didn't survive because they weren't used to hard manual labor like maybe someone from Poland or somewhere else. I thought that was interesting. The more educated somebody was, it lessened their chance of survival because they weren't used to they weren't used to that hard work. They were doing, what you'd call a white-collar job today. Being a doctor, being a professor. And, of course, they were one of the first to be gassed. They were rounded up, the educators, the professors, the doctors, especially if they were Jewish, and they were taken away, never to be seen again. I just think that, people really need to learn about history. And I want to thank you, Stella Hart, for coming on. It's amazing that, you were into music and you wrote this book. And this is a great first book. This is your first book, is it not?
I have written other things. I have written textbooks for the music industry. I do a lot of choral writing, and I write my own words, my own lyrics for choral compositions. I've written a couple of children's books, but an actual, at adult level, full-length novel, no, this is my first one.
Well, congratulations. And I think you should do more books. I think you're a very talented writer. And can you tell people where they can reach you, Stella Hart? And where they can buy your book.
Of course. The book is available on Amazon, amazon.com.ca, all the dot abbreviations. Barnes & Noble. It's available through both online in an ebook form as well as paperback form. So if you Google Discovering Twins, it'll pop up, and then you can purchase it in whatever form you may like. My website is stellaterhart.com, Terhart, stellaterhart.com. And you can go to a local book retailer, and they will order it in for you as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming on, Stella Terhart. Thank you for writing this book. I love when people tell their stories, share their stories. This is what we have to do, folks. We have to tell our stories to help other people. And I felt such a connection with you, Stella. Your mom had Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's runs in my husband's family, runs in mine. I was a caregiver. Your story just touched me in such a profound way. And I want to encourage people, go on Stella Hart's website, and I want you to buy this book. Order this book. I really do. This is a phenomenal book. You need to really read it. And I encourage, if any educators are listening to me, please buy this book and give it to your students as a history lesson. And I think parents need to buy this book for their children to read, to find out what happened. And it can happen. And, my dad used to say to me, Betsy, back in, the World War II, if you were quarter Jewish, like somewhere down the line, you got stuck, all right, in the ghetto. They didn't care. They didn't, they did not care. And, I forgot the whole poem. I even forgot who wrote it. But if we don't speak up against an injustice, no one's going to speak up for you when they're coming for you. That's my modified version. Right. I can't think of it. No one's going to speak up for you. And this is why I always say, go ahead.
And if no one speaks up for injustice, that means injustice wins.
That's right. Absolutely, Stella. Absolutely. Oh, it's such a pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much for coming on. Folks, thank you for listening. You're welcome. And good luck. Good luck with your sales of your book. Folks, thank you for listening. Please share this podcast to help other people to get information. And this is why I love being a host. I love hearing people's stories. I love giving people a chance to be heard. And I want to thank Sherry Rosen, President of Sherry Rosen Publicity, LLC, for arranging this interview. And I want to thank Jeannie White, who's station manager, Passionate World Talk Radio. And please read the blog that Jeannie writes, and thank you for producing the show, Jeannie. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. Thank you for subscribing. And it is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. I'm on your favorite podcast, Amazon.com, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, just to name a few. You'll never know who I have on my show if you don't subscribe. And I want to thank everyone for listening. And folks, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, because you know what? We need it. And shine your light bright. Be a light in the world and shine it bright. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host, Chatting with Betsy at Passionate World Talk Radio. Till we chat again, be blessed. Bye, everybody.
Are you looking for an internet talk radio station for your podcast? Look no further. At the helm of Passionate World Talk Radio are two women that want to provide a spot for you and your podcast to be heard. There are many other places for your podcast, but PWTR has the audience. You will not be disappointed. Our station has been on the internet for the past 16 years. Call us for more information. 484-364-1032 or text Jeannie White, station manager, at pwtrn@gmail.com for podcast show details. Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.